There's a moral rule in some ways that emerges out of that, which is that if you haven't set up the environment so that the participants will engage in it voluntarily, you've set up a pathological environment. It's a tyranny, or it's either tyranny or chaos. Those are the alternatives.
Yeah, I wonder we say something like this. Look, if there's an issue in the studio involving 2 to 3 learners, okay, well, likely they're going through something, or they have, they have a lot of energy, or they're not interested in what's happening right now. If it's 50% of the studio, what are we doing wrong with the game?
Right.
How are we making the game wrong?
Yeah.
But about reading, I think this is very important. I had a parent that was interested in the school say to me, well, how do you determine what they must read? And he was very much in the classical education side, which I have a lot of, I really enjoy a lot of that. And he said, well, you're telling me that they don't have to read these great books. They're not forced to read these great books. And I went through this idea of reading and developing a love for reading. And also that I would ask, maybe pose the question something like this. What's more important? The 4 years, maybe of high school, that you're engaged in reading deep books, making sure they do that, or making sure they love reading so much that the next 60 years is filled with enjoyable reading.
Right.
And I think that's maybe...
Well, and people will, if you teach them to love reading, they will advance in their reading to their zone of proximal development, and they'll read the most complex books they can manage, assuming they have enough knowledge to find those books. People will do that automatically.
Yes.
And so you might say, well, you should instill a love of the classics. And what that would mean optimally is that you inform people that great books exist and you show them where they are, but you pretty much have to let them come to those books on their own. And they may not be able to do that, well, maybe ever in their whole life, because great books tend to be relatively complex on the intellectual front, but they may have to come to that obliquely. Like in a lot of behavioral psychologists will give their clients self-help books, and intellectuals in the popular culture they have derogatory attitude towards self-help books. I mean, the whole genre is like, well, that's self-help. It's like, well, first of all, what's your objection to that exactly? You don't think people should be trying to help themselves?
Yeah.
And then, I don't know if you noticed, but that's actually introductory philosophy, moral philosophy. That's what a self-help book is. And you might say, well, I have contempt for it because it's introductory. It's like, well, where the hell do you expect people to start? Most people don't even read, right? And then when you see people who are willing to take a step into the domain of self-help, it means they've actually progressed in their reading enough so they're starting to contemplate the elementary ideas of moral philosophy and even theology. Yeah. It's like you should do everything you can to reward that. Right.
Well, it's an awakening of sorts for them. And it's
that's for sure.
Who are we to say that the point at which they're awakening is not the point that they should be at? It's like they're in a journey right now, and this is where they should be because they've elected for that to be the place. And how can we criticize them for not being in a different place?
Yeah, well, you do that by, proclaiming your moral superiority on hypothetical intellectual grounds. And
yes.
It's a pretty pathetic game. So you've got your kids, you're instilling in them a love of reading, at least in principle, by teaching them to read. So you know that kids actually tend not to enjoy reading, so to speak, until they can read a phrase at something like a glance, and they can start reading for meaning rather than to have to struggle with word comprehension. Mm-hmm. And so part of the trick with teaching kids, of course, is to get them past the point of stumbling over words so that it becomes as easy to read as it does to talk or to listen, let's say. So, but you've solved that problem to some degree by using these sophisticated reading education programs that are analogous in some ways to the Khan Academy.
Yeah, I would say that's part of the solution. When I say solution, it's just we're providing them the tool to be able to unlock something that they really want. And they want to know how to read. They want to be able to get a book off a shelf, to be able to read it. But I think also you have to rethink what you're thinking of as reading. Why can't a comic book be there as reading? Why can't a graphic novel be there as reading? And it can be, and the younger ones love those. And so they can develop that love of reading by something that, like, we would think, well, where's the content value in something like this? But in many of these are great stories, not all graphic novels. But
well, they're not popular novels unless they have they're not popular literary endeavors unless they have the capacity to grip the attention of the reader, and they're not going to grip the attention of the reader unless they tell a good story. So I think that is self-selecting. I mean, a story won't elicit attention from a reader if it isn't doing something for them.
Yes. So to the process of the school. So yes, we'll engage in reading. So what does the reading process look like? Well, number one, they'll pick a book that would constitute a badge book, something that they is maybe at their level of development, that on the cusp of being difficult, right?
Mhm.
Something that, and also maybe is interesting, possibly associated with their hero's journey, something like that. But this could be a who is book or something like that at the younger ages. Then they'll read that book and write a review on that book. And then they'll read that review during a Socratic discussion or after one completes, before they break the circle. The younger ages, that's it. You read it, you write the simple review on it. The review, it doesn't have a word count like requirement. It doesn't have anything like that. The idea is that you've read a book, you've written and you've answered 3 or 4 questions on it. What was your favorite character? What surprised you the most? Things like that. And then you present it in front of the tribe. Then as you get into the older studios, they'll actually vote on your book review. Did it meet the requirements? Do we feel like they really understood the plot line or something like that? And also, is there evidence that they didn't read the book? So there's some self-reinforcing here. And they can, if they deny the book review, so to speak, it's not, oh, it's done. It's like, hey, address these things and then come back and represent the book review.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
And then the next book they read for their next badge book, one of the rules is it needs to be more difficult than the last. So maybe they're not ready to do a badge book review for a while again because they're still working on reading proficiency. They have a goal, the book they want to do next, but they're not quite there yet. And so they're striving for something there. But what this tiers up to, if you look at, I'll give you a quick story about what I walked into on the middle school one day. And mind you, this is all from this system of not forcing reading, working to make reading fun. And so I walked into the middle school one day, and it was during a time in the schedule called Drop Everything and Read. And so it's just, they're all reading. I saw 3 girls and 1 boy sitting, and we have kind of like it looks like a shared workspace, something comfy like this. They're sitting in different chairs reading. And the books that I saw them reading were Atlas Shrugged, The Boys Who Challenged Hitler, The Da Vinci Code, and Unbroken. And this is all from without us saying you need to read any of these books. This is from them going to the shelf. And when you get in middle school, a deep book is a book that's won an award or changed the world in some way. And that's like kind of how you pitch a book that you'd like to be a deep book. And so by giving them options and selection, they wanted to challenge themselves and they wanted to read about like heroic stories. And that's just something that when I walk in and see something like that, I'm thinking like, yes, this is the way this should be. That they're moving up in this progression of excellence or maybe proficiency or something like that. And they're voluntarily choosing to go into these deep stories.
All right, so back, how much more content should we cover, content process with regard to elementary school?
Well, I think one thing I failed to mention at the beginning is our year is couched in what I call a badge plan. And so a badge plan is at the beginning of the year, after a couple weeks being in the studio, because we really make the first session. Remember, our years are 4 to 6 week sessions, and we take at least a week break. So we take a 4 to 6 week session, and in that first session, a learner will start working a badge plan for the year. And basically what they're doing on their own at first is saying, this is what I'd like to accomplish in reading and math and writers' workshops.
So they're starting to envision goals for themselves. Yes. And how young?
This starts at roughly 7 years old.
Oh yeah, that's really good.
Really good. And it's important for parents to know this, is that is not an accurate assessment at 7 years old. It requires like feedback. Because say, hey, I'd like to accomplish 4 grade levels of math this year. Well, that's a great ambition, but what they'll get is then feedback from a guide and from parents on saying, hey, do we think these are SMART goals? And we really use that rubric, that they're specific, measurable. But what I really like to focus on—
What is a SMART goal? Go through
specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound.
Yeah, okay.
So, and we're
great.
We start
so they have a rubric of evaluation for their vision, and that's also peer evaluated.
Absolutely, and that gives the peer something to evaluate.
That's great.
This is really specific that you want to accomplish 3 grade levels of math this year, but is it attainable?
Yeah.
And they'll walk through like what that could look like. So at the beginning of the year, they set out a badge plan. That badge plan is a signature is put on it by the student, a signature is put on it by the guide once they go over it and say it's filled with SMART goals, and then parents. And that essentially sets the stage.
Contract.
Yes. And that's another thing we need to talk about a little bit, is contracts within the studio. But that is one of them that then they have a document that says, here's what we've all agreed I'm doing this year. And so if you need to reflect back, they have a plan
and a goal.
And we do a check-in on this halfway through the year. and they can adjust their goals at that point. Did I set too
Uh-huh.
hard of goals? Were they too easy? Did I get all my badge books done right away because I was so focused on the love of reading that I have with Harry Potter or something like that? And so they'll have that as their plan. And then at the end of the year, they'll check in on that plan. How did I do? And that is not a graded process. It's an iterative process to get better and better at making goals that you can attain.
Yeah, well, right. It's also a great way of inculcating what the process of coming to self-knowledge, but also accurate self-knowledge. You know, we tend to think, especially in our idiot culture, that people are transparent to themselves. I can define who I am. And that's simply not true because you're too complex to be transparent to yourself. And so you're going to have all sorts of delusional ideas, some negative and some too positive, about who you are and what you're capable of. And part of the way you modify that, so you come to a realistic appraisal of yourself, is by smacking yourself up against the world and succeeding or failing, but also by encountering other people who go, yeah, I don't think so, or who pat you on the back and say, good job, right? And so by having kids develop an unrealistic vision to begin with, which is what's going to happen with young kids, because what the hell do they know? And then by modifying that with peer evaluation and guide evaluation, you're also helping the children come to a much more precise and accurate understanding of who they are and how they can foster their own development.
Absolutely.
That's really nice to have that inculcated so young. Okay, so the kids have a contract and they develop a goal, and the peers give them feedback, their teacher, their guide, their parents. So they're coming to more accurate self-evaluation. Let's turn our attention to middle school and high school. We've concentrated a fair bit in elementary, and that's fine. So lay out the situation in middle school for me.
Yeah, and I think just briefly, something I'd say about the reason I think there's a big focus in elementary school is that most schools in the United States get preschool, kindergarten right. Don't take it too seriously, have a lot of fun, explore the basics, be social. When you get into elementary school, it's like there's a switch that flips. It says, hey, college is coming, school's not fun, homework is here. And so I think what Wonder does is we're able to take that period of childhood and allow it to still be childhood. But there comes a time when you need to start to move up. And that's why we say, elementary, love learning, get along with other people. In middle school, work truly hard for at least 3 hours a day in flow. But and then I'll add high school there too. Have a tested and vetted idea of what you'd like to do with your life. And so let me back integrate into that.
Yeah.
With it, in elementary or in middle school, you are doing far more. I would say you're still doing Socratic launches every day. You have the kind of core work that you're working on.
What's the age range for your middle school?
It's 11 to 13, somewhere in that range. And it's a bit fluid because in a normal school, the constant is how long you can take to do some work. The variable is how proficient you are at it. In our school with mastery, the constant is we work for mastery. The variable is how long it takes you to get that done. And so if it takes you a few months or whatever extra, do that, that's okay. And it works within the system. So they have a similar structure where they're doing morning core skills work, afternoon quests. It's very much built on challenges that are delivered from a guide to the learners. And they go through on their own with challenges in Western civilization, with Writer's Workshop, and they're building that body of work throughout a session, throughout 6 weeks. The key, if I look broadly at middle school and high school, the key is that, and this is maybe a thought about a protest against delayed maturation, is that if you look at some people that we really respect in the world, like Da Vinci, you could look at Carnegie. These people started apprenticing at age 12 and 13. They were in the real world, getting real world experience at age 12 and 13. And
Michelangelo.
And so there's no reason that young people today aren't capable of the same thing. And so one of the defining characteristics of our middle school, as you're working on hard work, and remember, mind you, we have, if done properly at our school, there's no homework at any point throughout the school. This is all done within the time frames that we have at school. The progress.
How long are your school days?
Roughly 9 to 3:30.
Okay, so standard
school day. Yes.
Yeah.
And so what you'll start in middle school is your apprenticeship process. So you're starting to constrain that. You're saying it's exploration in elementary. As you get into middle school, you're really starting to hone in.
Right, so you can work 3 hours, and So this is also an answer to the question that I posed earlier,
Yeah.
which is how do you make sure that this is aligned with the real world?
Yes.
And part of your answer is, well, we put kids out in the real world.